Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we're both in new places today.
What's a new place?
Or you don't have your background covered. You got it blurred, but normally
Yeah.
don't have the same thing. Hey, Dr. McCray.
Hey, Dr. McCray.
Hey.
I'm still trying to figure out how to oh, there you go. How to share all this stuff. So what I found, oh no, that's my last one. That's child, I got a different outfit on. I'm thinking that's the same one.
Oh, we live.
Yeah, we're live.
Hey.
My face from last time was swollen. I had this allergic reaction, and so look at it. Everything on my face was completely swollen. Okay, so I was trying to share this on Facebook, but it's
Right.
not coming up. So Tandi has some videos. Oh, there it is. Okay, it says live. Let me see. Sorry. Now I'm trying to figure out how to share it. How do you share it?
Share what?
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sharing. This should be a more efficient way of doing this because you got to get on and then share.
Well, for now, this is what we got.
It is.
Hey, can y'all hear me? My microphone way across the room. Y'all can hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay. Cool.
So here's the interesting thing. I was I can't remember what event, but I was at an event just recently, and they were talking about like social media and about the fact that that there is so little like traffic that people get with just kind of organic, even if you have followers and stuff on social media, that they tend to not be able to find you any longer because they've changed the algorithm so much. So I thought it was just me, but that's just kind of part. I think a lot of people are talking about this. I was at a marketing, I remember it now, I was at a marketing conference. So I see, hey, Alethea, and then I see, is it Kesa? Aha. Hey, hopefully said that right. Casa, and Casa said they've been waiting to hear our perspective on this topic. So, yay, I'm waiting to jump into this topic. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Ìfétáyò Òjélàdé, always hanging out in Muskogee territory, also known as Atlanta, Georgia. And then my sister over there on the West Coast is Thandisizwe Chimurenga, and she's in Tongva territory, which is my hometown of Los Angeles. And then hanging out with me in Muskogee and Cherokee territory is Dr. Kenja McCray, who's an associate professor of history at, look, I said associate, so it's happening. She's getting a promotion.
Well deserved.
At Clayton State University. And so we are talking about the process of naming ourselves. Our other sisters are going to jump on as soon as they can. And I think this is a good topic because each of us were obviously born with one name, and then, people know us by different names. And so I think this is a good place to start. And I kind of wanted to start with you, Sister Tandi. This topic, because you were the one that kind of brought this to mind, and you were saying like, hey, we need to have a whole conversation about what this means to name ourselves. And so tell me what kind of inspired you to think that this is a conversation that we should have.
Part of it was sparked when we did a show. I can't remember which one it was, but you told us about the influence of Nina Simone on your parents.
Yeah.
And so that's a name story. Everybody has a name story. And I was thinking that would be a good topic to explore. And why not do it in March? Because March is the anniversary of the founding of Freedom's Journal, the first Black newspaper in the U.S. You know, I'm a journalist. Yes. And when they proclaimed in the masthead, or in that first editorial, we wish to speak for ourselves. Too long have others spoken for us. And so the declaration the issue of self-determination, the declaration of speaking for yourself, and even naming yourself is a very interesting journey for Black people. And so I had been thinking about that. And then I came across this video on Instagram. And like I said, your name story, my name story. I said, why don't we should talk about this. So do we want to show one of these? We have two videos.
Show that the latest one that you sent me. I think that's the one that was on Instagram. Show that to.
Now, what you talking about, the Uzo Aduba or the other one?
I don't. The very last one where
the first one I showed you from Instagram, where they're talking about the unique names that Black women would give.
No, do the second one, because I thought that was pretty interesting.
All right, so this one. Okay, let's share screen. Let's see what it looks like.
McCray for a second. There she is. No, that's you. How did we lose Dr. McCray?
Oh, there it is. Okay, I need for you to bring it up because it's not bringing it up.
To add it to the stage. Okay, got it. Look, I'm learning.
Wait, come back. Go back to it.
How did I do it? What did I do? I don't know what I did. Lord, wait, let me see. I removed it from the stage, add to the stage.
Okay, don't touch nothing. All right, so this is an actress named Uzo Aduba. She was in Orange is the New Black. She's done a few other things. She's now in, I don't remember if it's Netflix or whoever, but there's a show called The Residence that she's now starring in. And I came across this a couple of years ago. She's talking to some young people, but she's giving a name story. So let me see if I can press play and let's listen to her name story. Let me know also if the volume is decent.
Okay.
My family named me Ozamaka. That's my full name. It means the road is good. Isn't that a beautiful name? Thanks, Mom. I got it for my birthday. Ozamaka. But I grew up in a small New England town, and there weren't a lot of Nigerian Americans living in my region. And I would have teachers or anyone, neighbors, try and say my name, and it would be Azumeka, Uzamaka, Uzokuza, any version that they could think of other than Ozamaka. So I came home from school one day, and my mom was cooking in the kitchen, as she is wont to do, the mother of 5 children. And I said to her, Mommy, can I ask you a question? She said, I said, can you call me Zoe? And she stopped and gave that mother look that only mothers know and have, and said, why? And I said, because no one can say Ozamaka. And she looked at me and she said, if they can learn to say Tchaikovsky and Michelangelo and Dostoevsky, then they can learn to say Ozamaka. And I never asked her again. And what is amazing now, standing in my womanhood, in my power, is I wouldn't change my name for a second. I'm so proud of that name and what stems behind it and what it represents. So do not ever erase those identifiers that are held in you, whether it's your gap, whether it's your name, whether it's your food. It is yours, and it was given to you at birth, and it is yours to own.
I love that. Oh, wow. Okay, that's not the video I was talking about. It was another one, but that one was an excellent place to start. I love.
Yeah, so she was speaking to a gathering of young women.
Yes.
Girls and young women, yeah.
And it really reminds me of the story that I told y'all. I grew up and I really disliked my middle name. Mm-hmm. And I always knew that I knew that my parents were thoughtful about my first name. They were extremely thoughtful about my middle name, but I was embarrassed. I didn't tell people. And I always knew that I was named after Nina Simone. And I didn't know anything about her music, but my parents always told me the story of how I got my name. And it wasn't until I was in the kitchen at 27 and I was cooking. I don't know why I can't talk right now. I was cooking for my own children who had African names, and I was listening to Nina Simone's music. And as I listened to the lyrics, I was so proud that my parents had named her. I thought that was powerful, that they had spent that much time to think about the name that they gave me. And it makes me think, you know, even if you don't necessarily have an African name, your parents have a reason that they named you what they named you, and that is significant.
Hold on 1 second. Njamile said, "What happened? Did you press something and get rid of her?"
I promise I didn't. I just asked her. No. I said, "What happened to Njamile?" I don't know what happened to her.
You said that. Oh, I thought that was she who said it. Okay.
No, I don't know. What happened to her.
Okay. I'm sorry. Were you finished?
Yeah, and I wanted to share your journey of getting your name.
It is a fraught story, but at any rate, one of the reasons, you know, we come into, those of us who are not named with African names at birth, it's pretty much a similar process. We go through an awakening. We become conscious of something. We make a commitment, or we gather new information. We grow, we learn, and we decide that we want an African name. And some people do not do that for those very reasons. Well, my mama and my daddy, you know, it's my family name, and I was named after this parent or this ancestor. And so it becomes almost a source of tension for them. And for other people like me, I was like, this is a slave name. I'm going to get rid of this name. I'm an African woman. I want an African name. And I've got my nieces and my nephews. I got one niece, the oldest niece. She was not there this group. We used to come to my mother's house. We would all meet there for a Christmas dinner. And this one Christmas, the year I changed my name, I told my mom about it first. I hadn't told my siblings or anyone. My oldest niece, who would have had my back, she was back east that Christmas. My other niece and nephew, they were like 6 and 4 years old. So all they could do was just sit there with their mouths open. They couldn't help me, poor babies. But they always referred to that as the Christmas of 1989. That was the year I changed my name, and my mama just dropped it on my. Did you tell him you changed your name? And walked out the room while we're all sitting at the dining room table. Now my sister, my sister, who was like 19 when I was born, I always referred to her as my second mama. My sister gave me my first name. So she took it personal. She's like, change what name? I know you didn't change the name I gave you. And the rest of the evening was downhill. And I tell you, it traumatized me. My niece and nephew are in their 40s now. They still call it the Christmas of 1989. That's how deep it was. A rose by any other name is still a rose. You ain't African. Well, actually, if anything, you West African. That's a South African now. I was like, them Africans ain't thinking about you. It was traumatic. As you can see, I'm still traumatized by it. We laugh about it now, but it was rough. And my niece is still like, I wish I had been there for you. My oldest, I wish I had. That would be the year that I did not attend the Christmas. I was like, yeah, because I needed you. I needed you to have my back.
Well, I think you bring up an important point, and Dr. McCray and Dr. Claiborne, I want to get you in this conversation because I noticed that the conversation about naming ourselves and choosing African names or being given an African name has gotten more complex over time because, you know, people started out with like, oh, you got the white man's name and, you know, so, okay, you get an African name. But then I think that that's problematic because so many names are ancestral names, even if they are not traditional, African names, or they may be traditional African names like Lisa, they're ancestral names. Like our families have spent time and effort in picking these names. They mean a lot to our family. And so I think when some of us are younger, we can be more cavalier in the way that we choose a new name or take on a new name and introduce that to our families in ways that in some ways can honestly be hurtful.
Yeah.
And so I've seen things that happen and I just didn't think, I'm like, oh, that doesn't seem as productive. It kind of takes away from the idea of reclaiming this name. But I'm
not to monopolize the time, but when I can, I've got another naming story from my family I want to share. But the other thing that I wanted to say, and I hear you regarding the hurtfulness and the not wanting to turn our backs on our ancestors. When it comes to a slave name, I think that there's two ways of looking at it, and I'm just trying to give from my experience what I believe people's perceptions are. One, your master was named Johnson. That's why you named Johnson. The other aspect of that would be because your language has been taken from you now. All you know is English. So that is why you have these quote unquote English surnames. So in terms of a slave name, there's that different aspect that if you knew something other than Johnson or Smith or Woodard, if you knew your original language, you would have chosen a name other than X, Y, and Z. And again, it's not to be hurtful, but part of it is an act of reclamation, an act of self-determination, of naming themselves. But I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
No, that's good. That's good. Dr. McCray, can you tell us your story? So what we're doing, ladies, is if you have, part of an African name, or even if your name that your parents gave you, if you can kind of just tell us what's the story behind your name.
This is an interesting conversation because it was had in my household. One, because I grew up with a name that is unique. So people would ask me, where did your name come from? In particular, when I went into racially diverse settings. So my dad gave me the name but he wanted to make it unique. So a tradition in there in my dad's immediate family was to give for his sister, my aunt Linda, to give all the children, her siblings' children, her nieces and nephews, her children as well, very unique names. So like I have a my first cousin, for instance, is named Ignacio, and goes by Iggy. So my dad was like, well, I want to name my own daughter, but I wanted to be African, what would become Afrocentric, right? They didn't use that term at the time. And everybody is naming their daughters Kenya. So I want hers to be a little different. I'll just call her Kenja. And so that's how I got that name. So it's the nod to the African heritage, but then with that sort of more recent penchant for unique naming. And I used to be embarrassed by it. Wanted a name, like a kid. Wanted, like, many kids wanted a name that helped me fit in better. But now I really actually cherish names that stand out, particularly if you're doing searches, right? And you don't want to just blend into the sands of time with the sands of time. But I used to tell my mom that, like, oh, well, I went to ballet class and everybody asked me where my name came from, and I just didn't like that. And she was like, well, I wanted to name you Melody Ann. So you would have been a Melody. So, I went through a phase of, well, I wish you had, won the naming contest. But then but someone said, well, you're going to be really proud of your name one day. So don't be too hasty. And of course, I did become proud of my name, in particular because, in part, besides what my parents and my, I guess, community culture taught me, which was because I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, I had a pride for the activist culture in my town, in my heritage. But then with the overlay of hip hop, right, the hip hop of the 1980s and early 1990s, I gained an appreciation for that, also that edge of African centered nodding, right? Queen Latifah with her hat, right? Went all the way in, right? But Latifah, the little name and the little hat, the little kente stole, and I felt like my name had a kente stole on, right? So I did.
You never told me that before. I
I
love
did.
that.
I felt like my name had a little kente stole and a little hat, kufi. And
Mhm.
so when I got to undergrad, I actually participated in a rites of passage program. And for those of us who completed the program, we were gifted with a praise name that was African. It did not have to just be West African, because we had, Thandi, to your point, a fair amount of South African sisters on campus and in our some in our rites of passage program, who were founding members who helped build it. So it wasn't just about heritage, but it was also about solidarity.
Right. Pan African. Yeah.
Pan African. It was Pan African.
Hmm. Hmm.
And those sisters actually gave names, and uh, they were cherished by sisters who received names from South African sisters who were studying in the country.
Hmm.
And my name, I got the name Njamile, which meant upstanding, and so it was given to me based on how I showed my personality, how I showed myself to be in the uh, rites of passage process. So that's how people know me. They either know me as Kenja, with the, I guess, Kente Stole and Kufi name, or Njamile with the more authentic African name
Hmm.
from the rites of passage program.
Hmm.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Corrie and Estee, name stories.
Well, I don't have a chosen name, but I have a given name that I take very seriously. And I understand the politics of given names in my family, which I think the practice of that is African. And so I'm named after both of my grandmothers. Everybody in my lineage takes on a name of an ancestor. And when I realized is that, that comes out of the sort of lore of my family, that because Black people didn't have a last name, a lot of times they would know their first name. And what happened is, so for my cousins, the last name Scipio, which was the first name of our enslaved ancestor, became their last name, right? And
Oh,
so they understood that that was a way of keeping that on. What our tradition is, where there's twofold. So the first girl in the family is named after the father, and they take some element of their name. So my sister's name is Claudia. My dad's name is Claudius. Like if father's name is Robert, their name is Roberta. Like I have a cousin whose name is Faustina. Her name is Foster. And that is to go back to say that you can't always know people by their last name, but you will know them by their first name, because
Hmm.
you'll know they come through that line of people. So there would have been a Foster 1, a Foster 2, a Foster 3. My
Hmm.
brother's name is Abram. He's actually a Abram the second, but it skipped generations, so I don't think they kept up with the naming. So that's how that gets down. And when I first got my name, because like I said, named after both of my grandmothers, at first I was like, oh, I don't like it, blah, 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 blah. But when I really started to think about that. And I also know that Corrie was a Coretta Scott King's nickname. I also know that, so growing up, I kind of looked at this practice like, you know, what does that mean? And I knew, for example, Pocahontas is not her name, that was her mother's name. And that she, after she kind of got captured, that's how she wanted to be called. Like, so even as a little kid, I started making these connections. So her first name's Amanut, or also she's called Mataka. Harriet Tubman, whose first, you know, born name is not Harriet, it was Armenta, and she takes her mother's name, you
Mhm.
know, sort of when she frees herself. So I was like, okay, maybe this name is okay, because like my parents, I feel like they gave me a name that I've got to grow up into, right? Like it was a name that I should come into for an adult, and that I carry a history through my first name. So I'm my grandmother's child, right? That, so anybody asks me, or even my mother's name is Josie, they'll say, "Oh, Josie Jr." Like, and that was another thing, like calling a girl a junior, I
Mhm.
think was also very prevalent. So, like I said, I feel like the fact of the way we were named, the process of it is very African. And so the one time my mother with my younger brother was going to go crazy and not give him a family name, like a name that one of us has had before. She wanted to name him Shaka Zulu Claiborne. And my grandmother sat her down and she was like, "Explain to me, how is he related to us? What does Shaka Zulu got to do with us?" Right? But I was like, "Shaka Claiborne sounded kind of cool. I understand." She was like, "How are they gonna know where he's from?" And my mother relented, and she was like, "So his name is Abram Barrett Claiborne the second." Yeah, but I feel like it's one of those kind of things where I was like, my name is not African, but it's African.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Yeah,
yeah.
that's
Hmm.
very African. Yeah,
Absolutely. You
and
know,
even
real quick, I remember now the video that you're talking about. You're
uh
talking about the little sister. She's in. People were asking her how
why
to
she
be
has an
African
African name.
American, but how does? Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
let's let Estee go, and then maybe we can play
fine.
that video and then
Okay,
make a
I'll look
comment
for that.
on that.
Okay.
Because Estee has a good ancestral naming story too.
Um, which is why I was like, let me go after Corey, because I feel like my story's so long. So I'm gonna try to be concise, so we can play the video. But I feel a great affinity for my name, which is for me why you will always see my name. As much as I love and have a lot of attachment to my African names, and I hold them very dear. You're gonna see Estee Nina Dills on everything. You just will. But so for me, um, my father named me, and so my father actually named me before he knew my mother. And my father met my mother, and once they were serious, was like, "Listen, I plan to have 12 children, and the oldest is gonna be a girl, and her name is gonna be Estee Nina Dillard." And my mom was like,
See, you need to know this if you're gonna get with the program. Okay.
Because it's the way we going, so you got to
"This
be
is what we
on this.
doing." And my mom was like, "Huh?" You know what I mean? And like he was like, no, he was like, "Yeah, that's the plan. Like my oldest is gonna be a girl, and her name is gonna be Estelina Dillard." So my father's mother's name was Ethel, and his kind of adopted godmother was named Essie Harvey. And Essie Harvey was a really pivotal figure for him because my father grew up in abject poverty. I didn't have any context for that really until I was an adult. Um, I just thought they were like, country poor. But it was really abject poverty. And Essie Harvey was the principal of like the community school, and my father's oldest brother had gone to the school, and he was the first one in the family that was like, "Oh, you can get this thing called the GI Bill and go to the military and go to college." And so I'm gonna go to Tuskegee University, well, Institute at the time. And so my father kind of borrowed his older brother's dream and was like, who is this lady? I heard about this thing. And for her, it stuck with her that like, who is this little boy? That's like, my brother told me that there was a school. And so she took an attachment to my dad and kind of took him on and took him in like a godson. And so they had a really special bond. And ultimately, my father was the only one of his siblings that went to college. And that's exactly what he did. He went to the Navy. He did not go to Tuskegee for undergrad, but he did go to Tuskegee for graduate school. And so his way of combining Essie and Ethel, because for him those were his mothers. The one who for him parented his life was his birth mother, and the one that parented his purpose for him was Essie Harvey. And so that's where you get Estee. And Nena is a really beautiful story because Nena was my great grandmother. And the complex part of Black people's narratives is that my grandmother, Ethel May Parker Dillard, had a complex lived experience. And so my father and his siblings really were kind of nurtured by their grandmother. So in that nurture, they really grew more emotionally close to her. And she lived on the same plot of land because she was a sharecropper. She was born enslaved. And so she spelled her name Nena. We don't have a birth certificate for her. So we don't know, the way that, we know the way she spelled it. She spelled it Nena. And having just kind of looked it up and researched it, I've actually found that in some indigenous Spanish cultures, there is a version of Nena that literally means great granddaughter.
Interesting.
That is translated that way. And so, and that's spelled with an E. Like there's the one with an I and then there's one with an E that literally means great granddaughter. But that was the parent that he had the kind of emotional attachment to, because my grandfather, my dad's father, was murdered when he was 2, when he was a toddler, by racism. So, he was the adults in his home were his grandmother, his father's mother, and his mother, Ethel May. So I'm named after all of those women.
Wow. Thank you. I see, and Thandi, you can cue up the video. I see, I think ACLM Prof says, my grandmother sat me down too. This is to Corrie. She wants to know how any of my children were going to carry on our immediate family names if they all had continental African names. And this is where I'm saying the complexity of this is. So Thandi's got this video that she sent me, and I was like, this is interesting. So she's gonna play that for us.
I can't find that one, but I sent you 3 videos. I can play the other one let's just play the video, shall we?
Okay, play the video.
So this one is 55 seconds long. Hold on. Okay. Let me share my screen. Okay.
Look at all this new kind of stuff.
Is it up?
Yeah.
There
now,
we go.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, hold on 1 second for me.
And look at all 5 of us on the side.
Yeah.
Did you know that the unique names many African Americans choose for their children carry a profound history? Enslaved mothers who were actually allowed to name their children often gave them distinctive names, knowing the painful reality that they might be sold away. A unique name made it easier to ask others on different plantations if they recognized someone with that name. A child named Ari would be easier to locate than a child with a common name like Alice. After slavery ended, many enslaved people completely renamed themselves, their first and last names. Some rejected English names altogether to cut all ties with their former enslavers. Creating names and giving unique names to children became a part of African American culture that still exists today. However, many African Americans are completely unaware of the origin. We must unbury our history. Black History Month is coming up. If you're a teacher or a parent, my ebook, Black History: Hidden Legacy Unburied, is a great resource.
Okay, we'll take off the advertisement.
Yeah, it's a commercial.
The little commercial. I thought, so
That's
what I thought was
hilarious.
interesting. So there was another video. I think that one is helpful, but there was another video
Mhm.
which it never even crossed my mind that anyone would say this, where people were attacking this young woman because she had an African name, and it was like, well, why do you have this African name?
If you're
Which
African
I
American,
was like, oh,
more
that's an
specifically,
interesting.
if you're Black American, so you know that comes from them alphabet people who shall not be named. Anyway, but in
And I
addition to the confusion that they have wrought, I know there are a lot. So much of our history is not known, but when it comes to the Black Power movement and the cultural aspects of the Black Power movement, so many people do not know that history. You know, we think about afros, we think about bell bottoms, but people call what people call reclaiming their name, and the whole thing of the dashiki coming from the brother who founded the Yoruba village, Osurgiman, right? He started in a Yoruba temple in New York before he moved down to South Carolina. I was telling a brother the other day before I get carried away and cut me off. There's a video, one of the videos of Malcolm X speaking in Harlem, and the founder of the Akan tradition in the U.S., Dinazulu, Nana Dinazulu. He's drumming in the background. But do you know who else is performing as they're drumming and Malcolm X is getting ready to speak? There are
Osage-Amon.
Huh?
Is it Osage-Amon?
No.
No? Okay.
No, it's a group of Black women who are doing African dance. And I was telling a brother the other day, I said, guess. You're never going to guess who was on that stage doing African dance, but I want you to guess. You will never guess. But
Maya Angelou?
No.
No.
Oh, you talking? No. What's Catherine Dillard?
No.
Oh, okay.
Esther Raleigh, Florida, from Good Times.
Oh yeah.
Oh, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
That totally makes sense. So,
Mhm.
Dr. McCray, I want you to give us some history and background on this. And I know you're gonna be like, I don't know, as you get ready to give us a dissertation on this. But I think this is interesting. So I remember, like, my parents, I told you they named me after Nina Simone. One of my brothers has, one of those 1970s Afrocentric, African names, not quite African, but Afrocentric, where you know that it's a Black person. And when I started moving towards the idea of thinking about an African name, my dad was pretty upset about that, but for an interesting reason. He was like, that's what those cultural nationalists do. So he had a critique about choosing specifically African names and then wearing specifically African clothes. Now, he didn't have anything. He wasn't one of those people that said, we're not from Africa. That's not him. He was very clear that we are African people. He had a Pan-Africanist perspective, but he specifically tied those kinds of things, the African clothes and the African name, to cultural nationalism. And so, Dr. McCray, I'm wondering if you can kind of give a little bit of history of why there may be a tension there.
I mean, the division is a false dichotomy. Although I write about it and I teach about it, because sometimes it's easier to categorize things and break them down into bits and pieces, right? But the dichotomy is false. And Scott Brown is a historian. He's an African American studies, and part of what he has written about is that the rivalry that occurred between the Black Panther Party and the US organization, particularly around the shootout that occurred at UCLA in 1969, got into the theorizing about the Black Power movement overall. And so it caused people to speak as if there was a hard and fast break between people who were oriented toward the Panthers and to name them as revolutionary nationalists, and people who were oriented toward the US organization and the way they did things and named them as cultural nationalists, as if as if, nobody who was oriented toward the Panthers ever changed their name or ever wore African or what we would now call Afrocentric clothing. The not wearing them, the wearing the more iconic Black Panther Party sort of uniform of black leather jacket and a baby blue turtleneck and a tam would be more the California Panthers, right? But there were many branches of the Black Panther Party. And if you say, for instance, were to look at New York Panthers, um, maybe Asada Shakur being one more common example, you'll see those name changes and more of the um, aesthetics of what people called cultural nationalism. And that there's not a hard and fast line, because if you read their philosophies, their ideologies that they were developing, you'll see that people who were a part of the Black Power movement um, didn't eschew, if they wore a dashiki, if they changed their name, they didn't eschew a revolutionary change. Many of them just thought that a cultural change had to come along with the revolutionary change, or else you would just reproduce the oppression that you had before the revolution. So the cultural nationalists, so-called cultural nationalists that align themselves with groups like us, or even like Thandisizwe said, the Yoruba temple that became those people who went to help found Oyotunji village, but many of them also helped found the Republic of New Africa. They um, would they theorized and practiced this idea that you had to have a deep cultural change. What people who would follow the path of Dinizulu into re-Africanizing, they called it, toward a Khan culture. Um, they specific well, followers of Dinizulu specifically called it re-Africanization. So I'm going to read that name back on what other people were doing, and it felt as if there had to be a cultural re-Africanization, a cultural what I call, I don't know if this is too heavy for this this forum, but a anti-syncretization, right? Syncretization is a mixing, an organic kind of often mixing of religious views and values. I expanded to talk about culture, and particularly when you're looking at the things that Osageman and people who were around him did. They consciously said, we got to get rid of what we see as the imperial, the colonial aspects of what has happened to this religion as it has developed in the West, and combine it with what we need, right? African elements, link it back up to its African roots.
So then my
And
question becomes,
so then that's when you saw the naming.
sorry, my
Go ahead.
question then becomes now, um, and it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, though. So this idea, okay, so we re-Africanize, get an African name, and all that, but then what does that do to the stories like Corrie is telling, like Thandi is telling, that Estee is telling, of us as African Americans that have these names that are connected to specific ancestral lineage? When I think about my family and just the names, I mean, there are names that are passed down in my family. And so again, I mean, I think I've grown. I would say I've grown over time. And so even by the time that I changed my name legally, I actually went back and forth on whether or not I was going to just add the African name, and not necessarily give up the names that my parents gave me because I knew that they were significant. And I mean, obviously because of the name I have now, you see the choice that I made, but that wasn't an easy decision. And so I'm wondering, what are your thoughts? And it's just, even as people are listening, what are your thoughts too about this idea of African Americans having these two kind of realities of wanting to maybe possibly re-Africanize or recapture this link to Africa, but then at the same time maintain this history that we have in the United States?
Well, I
Oh,
feel like
always with
that,
the double consciousness.
right, double
Just go with
consciousness.
the voice.
But I feel like that again is this great African question. Can you be your full Black self with the name that you were given? And if you can't, you should change it, right? I don't feel like there should be a politic around like, oh, well, your name was so and so so. And even, I feel like the chosen name people have for themselves, because there's in all sorts of cultures. Catholics, like Toni Morrison's name was not Toni Morrison, right? So this kind of the idea that that's her confirmed name, that's the name that she chose to be called, means something, right? That she has a reason, and her given name is Chloe, in case people don't know. Chloe Anthony Wofford, and she goes by Tony for most of her life, and Morrison is her husband's name, or ex-husband's name. But I feel like that's one of the kind of things where for African people, I feel like the problem is when we want to suggest what people's, I guess, commitment to Blackness or the movement is by their name.
Yeah, I agree.
But we realize that there are very political reasons why people either keep them or don't keep them. And like I said, for me, it was just not, I don't want to say stamped in my head, but it's like I have to carry this legacy, that is my job here. Like, but if you can know your history and you can tell it to people and you can model it to people without a certain name that you were given, but you still stand in that work, then I think that's great. Being from South Carolina, though, it is like little African villages. People don't know your name. They're like, oh, you're so and so's child, right? Like statewide. It doesn't, I literally was just stopped. I mean, I could be in wherever. They're like, oh, I know your mother. I know your grandmother, right? Just because I said my name, oh, I know exactly who you are. And for them, that's really important. Like it's like a clan kind of thing. Um, but when you live in a global world where for some people they don't need that immediate thing. And I even thought about the last name and Claiborne, which is obviously my enslaved name, my dad's name for Virginia. So the same Liz Claiborne family that was from the governor of Virginia, that later on that same family became the governor of Louisiana and part of the new territory. So the idea that I got ancestors who was marched all the way down from Virginia to
Wow.
Louisiana. But, I was talking to, like sort of understanding ancestor lineage. I was like, these people were not great. Like, and the fact that people were taken all enslaved, I was like, why would you keep, the last name? Because I know so many people did. Like, there's this idea that, and I think that's a misnomer too. And maybe Kenja could talk about this, that like Black people just took on the name of the master. Sometimes they did, but a lot of times they named themselves even coming out of slavery, right? Like they chose the last name that they have. Like in Alabama, there's a lot of people whose last name is Africa, and that's not a
Mhm.
recent thing. That is from the 1800s, right? There are a
You
lot
can
of
see on the
people,
census a lot. You'll see the name Africa, and then
yeah.
and I don't, not to cut you off. You'll
No,
see.
no, no.
I was surprised to see that on the census. Records. You'll see people whose name is Africa, and then you will also see my I think great grandfather or great, I can't remember, on their what do you call the thing that the men have to register for the military draft? Not the draft,
Hmm.
but
No, no,
Selective
I know what you're
service.
talking about.
so like that
Selective
those cards,
service.
my on there when you can see that he wrote in for his ethnicity. He wrote African.
Right. And so that's our, I think, mistake, that we think enslaved folk didn't have some kind of African consciousness or didn't remember the stories or where they're from or their culture. especially because they did, right? So even if they were forced to change the name, did change their name, the question is, do they keep those stories? And one of the things I understood about the Claiborne name is, my understanding is that because that we were so spread out, forced apart by slavery, they kept it so we could find our people. So that if you were sold into Alabama or Tennessee and you know, did not necessarily know your mother's name because she didn't have a last name, that you could follow along because you knew they were on this plantation. You knew they were on this horse plantation in Virginia, and you could perhaps, because there was a Claiborne Parish, Tennessee, there's a Claiborne, you know, area in Mississippi, there's a township in Louisiana, and there's a street in Louisiana, that perhaps you could start to use that as a place marker to find your people. So to me, I was like, oh, well, you know, that isn't about trying to be like white people. That is just like, how do you keep your clan together when there were these things that separated them apart? And sometimes it will also be because you knew a last name, I mean, a first name that was African that people kept. Or because you also realize that there were naming conventions, like I said, that the daughter would take a part of the first name of the father, and they would make that their first name. And you were like, oh, they from South Carolina. I was like, I'm pretty sure they're from the Carolinas, because where else they gonna do that at? Like, where's the I'm not saying that nobody else does it, but it's such a common thing that a lot of times if you did not have a last name and you had to name yourself, like Booker T. Washington does, like so many other people do who don't have a last name, he takes a president's last name. But one of the things that you'll find, like in Charleston, for example, they didn't want to choose one president. There's a whole family, their last name is just president. It's not, you know, Lincoln, Washington, Jackson, or Johnson. It is president. And when you meet a president, you know they're from Charleston. They're just like, oh, y'all that family, y'all just wanted a good name. You didn't want to take a specific white person's name, so you just called yourself the president. I love it, though.
I'm here for it. I'm here for it. Estee, you were trying to jump in. What's up?
Yeah, I was just going to respond to this part of the conversation, because I do think I feel like it's complex to be thinking about how Black people feel about our Blackness and our Africanness, both here and on the continent. And I really think that's what this naming conversation is about for us. And it is shaped outside of just how people see themselves as or as not, or as or not as Pan-African. Because I don't think my folks would see themselves as Pan-African. I don't think they identified with that movement or located themselves in that movement. Particularly folks in the South or in the Bible Belt. I think that identity just looked very different in that region. But because of the civil rights movement and how it was shaped in that region, there was a deep sense of lineage and a deep sense of belonging and Blackness and Africanness and of connection to the land as well, and of the need to continue lineage and to name that lineage. But it wouldn't have been articulated in some of these same terms, if that makes sense. So I just felt like that was important to just say, because I don't think anybody in my family or from any of those regions, which is kind of even why I was why I tell the story about my name in the way that I do, because a lot of these things were shaped around communities and just kind of like where you landed, right? Like my folks ended up where they did because they walked there from the plantation that they left. Like they were on a plantation in Twiggs County, Georgia, and they walked to Bibb County. That's how we got to Macon. You know, because they were on the backside of Bibb County, and Macon is the city in Bibb County. But this community really that was surrounded around this church. The Swift Creek community is around Swift Creek Missionary Baptist Church. That was surrounding Swift Creek schools, right? Because Black people were building schools there that then, of course, were integrated into the public school system. and like all those kinds of things that we know just about how history went. That would be more in Kenja's lane to explain, but I think that all of that for us is a part of the lineage. So for Nena, that was connected to her grandmother's name. Even for Ethel May, right? Like Ethel May wasn't the first one. Ethel May's grandmother's name was Ethel, and she was the master's daughter. But they called her Babe, because supposedly she was so fair skinned that, and her, how the story was told to me is she was so fair skinned that her skin always looked like baby skin. So they called her Babe. So even that, it's the same thing that everybody else is talking about. But my folks feel like this is my land, right? Like we have heir property on both sides of my family that we inherited, that we were enslaved on. So like this concept that it needs to be African or that it needs to be in Africa doesn't resonate in the same way for folks who were in chattel slavery in the South. And then, you bring in these kind of Christian and Bible politics. And I will add another personal story that I thought about too. And because I do think there is a consciousness that comes with that, because my mom tells this funny story. Just even thinking about like marriage and a lot of what Corrie is talking about with how we choose a name, because my mom says when I was like 2 or 3, people would be like, oh, because you get, I would say, initiated into these kind of politics very early. And so people would be like, oh, you're so cute. You're going to get married and find you. And I'll be like, he going to be Mr. Dillard. Like, whatever. And my mom would be embarrassed because she would be like, why would you say that? Because I was 2 or 3 or whatever. Of course, I don't remember. But she would be like, how did this child even think of, like, that would never occur to my mother. And in my consciousness, I was like, Mr. Dillard, but that came from somewhere, right? So, I mean, obviously that's not far from my consciousness, but.
That was that ancestor speaking through you. that great grandmama.
It's complicated because as you were talking, Estee, I was thinking, yes, and Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, and most, as far as my understanding goes, of the Universal Negro Improvement Association branches were in the South. So yes and no. And I think it depends on how you ask the question, when you ask the question. Because say for instance, dad was grew up or went for a long time to an an AME, African Methodist Episcopal Church, but was the same person who would say, oh no, I'm not African.
It sound and look just like he just got off the boat yesterday.
Yeah.
So yes, and I hope I didn't say that, and I don't think you're saying this because it's certainly not a monolith.
No,
I'm just saying that. But there certainly was this consciousness also.
Yes, also. Yeah, and both and.
Yeah, both
yeah.
Both and I think the thing that I would even add to that too, even around the naming piece, that I think is interesting about what you just raised too, because there's also this lineage of naming that's also true in my family from the Bible, of Black folks naming folks and naming folks through the lineage,
right,
from the Abrahamic and biblical text, which is another interesting lineage. I think the other piece that I would add too, which is kind of a different lane, but this is my own kind of consciousness also. I appreciate parts of it. So for instance, Estee actually is a Persian name. And anciently, like those are Black people. Like anciently, that goes back to Kemet. So for me, ultimately, I still got an African name.
Mm.
And so I think something that I came to in my adulthood is also thinking about the expansiveness of African consciousness and the expansiveness of African people, right? Because African people have been indigenous to more than just places that are physically in Africa. And have influenced culture and created culture and systems and theologies and spiritual systems in places far beyond what we think of as traditional African spaces, and especially just West African or South African or the ones that are more popular, right? And so for me, I think that's the other thing that I kind of, once I really started to study and had more access, ultimately, now of course, there are many things laid onto it, millennia on top of it, but ultimately it's a Kemetic origin.
So you're saying something, and I'm trying to figure out how to articulate this. It's almost like we have to begin to have a conversation, relook at this idea of what is African, because it's as if we're, in some ways, we get kind of twisted up and separate ourselves as African Americans as not authentically African. If my parents choose to name their twins, and one of their twins is Jamal. Now, anybody that knows a Jamal that was born in 1970, you know that that's a Black name. You know that your parents probably had some kind of political consciousness that
or
was
not.
intentional.
Or
Wait,
not.
what'd you say?
I said or not. I've
Or
had a lot
yeah.
of people sit in front of me, and I'm like, oh, so you have an African name, and they're like, huh?
Oh, well, I mean,
Yeah.
we're not
Yeah.
talking about the
This
people.
new generation.
Yeah, we're not talking about that. But what I guess what I am saying is the fact that Corrie says I am named after both of my grandmothers. The fact that Estee says this is a combination of two people's names. That is very African.
Yeah.
Ìfétáyò is a combination of two words: Ife, love; Ayo, joy. Ìfétáyò is love brings joy. And so it's this combination. Like, I can point to people in my family where there's a combination of names, whether these creative things that are done that are uniquely African.
Right.
Maybe it's not coming out of a quote unquote traditional African tongue, but the way that it is constructed is uniquely African. And so it's just making me think, like, for me, a re-examination is like, so what am I really calling the African name? Is it that it has to be Ìfétáyò, Njamile, Okunsade, Thandisizwe, or can Corrie be an African name because of the way that it was intentionally constructed?
She was named in an African way.
Yeah.
And I think that part of
And I think that's
why
different.
we have
I
that
think
problem,
it should. Yeah.
I think part of why we have that problem is when you look at cultural nationalism and the way it's been portrayed or the way it's been promoted or the way that we receive it, and Kenja, you can help me with this, is because of a specific context. And I think that that's an unfortunate context, but I think it has to do with who people situate as the main cultural nationalists, and that's Maulana Karenga and the US organization, and the influence that they had out of the West Coast spreading eastward, as opposed to, say, for example, Osurjiman Adefunmi of the Yoruba Temple, that would spread throughout the East Coast, but didn't necessarily make it out here to the West Coast in the same fashion. I think that, and even though Karenga did not establish using Kiswahili as quote unquote Black folks' re-Africanization tongue, there were others who did that before him and in conjunction with him. but it's always most times it's connected to him, and I think that that's where we get this thing of, well, if you're not wearing this, you're not wearing African attire, and if your name is not Thandisizwe, you don't have an African name, and if you don't wear your hair naturally, you know that's not, you're not in keeping in traditional African, or you're not within African tradition. So
And
yeah.
I just think that's
I think that
our way, the way we make we tend to.
there's trappings, and
Yeah.
then there's the overall context.
yeah.
I think that's also the way humans tend to make sense of the world, right? Like our brains tend to take shortcuts, right? And we have to keep doing stuff like we're doing to push back against the shortcuts. I mean, not everybody has an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half to hash through what it means. And I think yeah, and to get back to the roots and say, well, yeah, and no, yeah, okay, who started this, when, where, and what does this mean? So I think somebody already said it. I can understand what you're saying, that it's what did you say, Tandi? It's African in its construction, Corrie, right? Or Estee. But it's not, it's different. It's a different thing than what people were trying to do or doing at the height of the Black Power movement, in terms of decentering what they saw as slave names, and recentering what they saw as African-centered names. But someone already said it doesn't have to be that if your name is Corrie, or your name is Krista, or your name is Estee, I can't look at your name and be like, I can look at her name and tell she not down. You cannot. You cannot. That's the point.
And not only not only can you not, when you hear Corrie's story and you hear Estee's story, they are more in touch with African tradition than some of these Jamals and Kwames and Aisha.
That's what my point was gonna be.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what
stop it. You know I'm telling the truth.
Corrie, I want you to finish up. Let me just say that last year I was at AT&T and Kwame Jones was trying to holler at me hard. And I guarantee you Kwame Jones didn't know where the Kwame came from.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know.
Let's talk about the fact that this is a particular...
Real quick. Not even that they don't know. They're just not in touch with their ancestral lineage. That's what I meant. They're not in touch with their ancestral lineage the way Estee and Corrie just laid it down. All right,
so Corrie,
and controversial.
Yeah.
Well, real quick. This is an American problem, right? Let's be very clear. This is not, you don't go to the Caribbean where people are troubling like the Africanness of their name. In Africa, it's not the same people not troubling the Africanness of their name. In Brazil, they're not troubling the Africanness of their name. And I feel like, I mean, because it's interesting, everybody hears Tucson, you know, and they say, whoa, that's a revolutionary. His name literally means All Saints. He's named after, it's very common for people who are Catholic, like All Saints Day, all this kind of stuff. It's this kind of notion that, but his name and the reason Black people like it is French. But the reason why people like Toussaint, because it means I bring all my ancestors with me, right? Like it is the same reason why, like I said, our parents named us after our parents. We're bringing our ancestors with us. So whether people are like, well, Toussaint's revolutionary, is it? Or is it that the work that you're doing? And I feel like, and I don't know why America's specific like that. Nobody would say, oh, Marcus Garvey, he has his, his government name, so he can't be about Africa. Nobody did that for him. But for us in America, it becomes this litmus test, this really interesting thing. And I don't know exactly why, but I think that it might be in America because we are really divorced from these stories of how you name people and the importance of the practice of it, that I think people get like confused, and maybe they just need they need sort of markers. And like I said, so for them to name their son Toussaint, great, do it. But like, know his story too, right? That's all I'm saying.
Well,
Okay.
I would
Go ahead, Dr. McCray.
So I wouldn't. Okay, so I kind of I understand what you're saying, Corey, but I don't. I would avoid sweeping generalizations because there to me there was a significant sector of people, at least in Jamaica, who were troubling names, right? Rastafarians. So some of the most, I guess, outspoken Pan Africanists, at least artistically, would trouble, sort of
What does trouble
names
mean?
and names. I
Wait.
would say
Let me.
complicate, right?
Oh,
Complicated. Question. Is
okay.
that how you
Like
use the
who?
term?
Give me an example.
An example of a Rastafarian who would
Yeah, that
trouble,
troubled their name. That's not an
not
artist.
their
So
okay.
I feel like there were a lot of people who were taking names because they were musical artists, just like, SZA got a name, like somebody else got a name, or Sizzla, which is like an important, a reggae artist, whatever.
Mhm.
But I feel like for somebody, Bob Marley, for example, Robert
Mhm,
Nesta, right?
mhm.
Like for him to choose Rastafarianism and love the lineage of understand his lineage was African didn't mean he had to change his name, is what I was saying. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, that one. I'm not going in those weeds because he did
Okay.
not love the Marleys. The Marleys rejected him.
I didn't say
But
he
that's different.
loved
But look
them,
at
but the idea that he would carry a name that in its trouble, right? Like his mixed
mhm.
raceness, the way that, his mother, the father, white father, all this other kind, and his Asian background, like all of that. I don't feel like he had to necessarily. The only way I can say I'm looking to Africa, I'm going in the lineage of Marcus Garvey is to change his name, right? Like he didn't change his name to Selassie number one or two, like, and I feel like that was part of the thing. Like I'm just saying for me, I personally don't know any Jamaicans who changed their besides Muda Baruka, but again, he's an artist, right? Like I don't know any people who've changed their names that are
Well,
not performing artists
are you saying
to
changing or
significant
name it? Because I would just say point
naming,
to
choosing an African name for themselves if it's not their birth
or
name
their
is what I'm
children,
saying.
right? And so I would point to the Safia, what's her name's auto or yeah, memoir.
Sinclair,
Sinclair,
Safia
yes,
Sinclair, yeah.
Sinclair. Like, yeah. So just off the top of my head to point to some of that Pan Africanist naming does show up. I feel like substantial amount of it does show up within Rastafarianism.
So,
Well,
okay, this
I
is an
know you.
important
I just
conversation.
don't.
Hold on, Corey. This is an important conversation, but I recognize some people need to go, including
Oh
myself,
yeah.
in
Oh.
a second. So I promise you, we will continue this conversation because Thandi, you're onto something. This is significant. Estee, give us our final comment on this topic.
Oh, let's see.
Oh, I'm just assuming that it looked like you kept leaning forward like you was trying to say something. So that's hey, if you ain't got nothing to say, then you ain't got nothing to say.
No, it had gotten good to me, but I had like 4 things. That's why I'm like one. That was the face of one. My comment, my final comment will be: remember that your ancestral power is always to name yourself for yourself.
That's right.
We all have that power.
Yeah.
Use it in the ways that your ancestors would.
I love that. I love that. That's a good closing comment. So this has been a good discussion today on the power of naming ourselves. And sounds like that conversation is not just about like if you take a name for yourself, but then the ways in which historically Africans have named themselves and in their lineage. So I hope
And
to
I got 2 more name stories, so we need a part 2.
So clearly we're going to have a part 2. The other thing I want to point out in terms of names is like, look at Thandi's name is Zizwe. Even just taking that little part of this traditional South African name and doing that thing that we do, that's very African. And it's very African American the way that you've done that. So I want to thank everybody. I want to remind you that we are here every first Friday having conversations. One thing that I've never asked anybody to do is if you have a particular topic that you want us to cover, if you know that there is something that is coming up that's in the community, that, you know, it's, I mean, we're doing everything from books to movies to just commentary about what's going on politically, then drop something in the chat. But the thing that you can really do that's helpful to us is if you share this information, share the video, like, comment, all of that stuff is very significant for us, and it helps, you know, the algorithm do its little thing. I am Dr. Ìfétáyò Òjélàdé. I am joined with Thandisizwe Chimurenga, who is an author, a journalist, and a social commentator. I'm also joined by Estee Nena Dillard, who's also known as Okunsade. She is a Reverend, and she's also an Ifa Egungun and Olokun priestess. And then also Dr. Corrie Claiborne, who is an associate professor of literature at Morehouse College here in Atlanta. So I'll see y'all next time. Take care.